So, thank you for coming. This is your third, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. So you've sort of grown up in the Web 2 stage, I would say. I didn't mean that the way it sounded. So sorry. But yesterday you had a very big announcement, or perhaps just yet another announcement in what has been a series of a lot of big announcements recently, almost all of them having to do with the themes that we've been talking about here. This one was messaging. So many folks have said this is a Gmail killer. And when we asked Carol Bartz to say one word after I said Facebook, she said competitor. And I think that's because of mail. I'm not sure that it was because of Facebook finance. Give us your encapsulated view of what Messages is about and how it differentiates, because I think people might be a bit confused by the framework of mail.
Sure. So, I mean, we went into this looking not to build an email product, right? But thinking about, what would be a modern messaging system if we rethought this from scratch? And, one of the interesting things, I started off the conference yesterday, or a little press conference, giving the story of, a couple of Thanksgivings ago, I was hanging out with my girlfriend's family, and my girlfriend has this sister who's in high school. So whenever I get a chance to talk to high school kids, I always want to ask them what type of stuff they're using, right? Because I think I'm kind of young, but when you talk to high schoolers, you feel old immediately, right?
Yeah, I know.
So I was asking them, what kind of stuff are you using, right? Do you use email? Do you use these different social networks? Do you use different iPhone apps? And so when we got to email, I was like, all right, well, what do you use? And they're like, well, some of us use Gmail. Probably most of us use Gmail. A bunch of us use Yahoo. But we don't really use it that much. I was like, well, why? I thought everyone uses email. And they go, well, it's too slow. What do you mean it's too slow? Email's instantaneous. You send an email and it gets delivered. And what they meant was that it was too formal, right? The types of communication that a lot of people are doing these days, things like SMS and IM are just a lot simpler, right? I mean, you don't have to remember an address. You pick out someone's name that you want to send something to, you send it to them. You don't have to think of a subject line. You don't need to say, hey, Mom, at the beginning. You don't need to say, love, Mark, at the end. It doesn't need to, there's no paragraphs, or you don't need to keep track of different threads or anything like that. It's just really simple. And I think that messaging in the future is going to resemble that a lot more because it's a lot more natural. We have one thread, right? A conversation between us. We don't have 20 different conversations. So mapping it out like that, we think makes a lot more sense. So when we kind of got started thinking about how to build a messages product, we didn't come at it from the perspective of, let's add email functionality. We came at it from the perspective of, let's take away everything that we can, right? So we got rid of subject lines. We got rid of the divide between IM and messages on Facebook. So those are now the same thing, and we made it so now it's interoperable with email as well and SMS. So now you kind of have one system where you can just send people simple messages and they can get delivered to people wherever they are. If they're on Facebook, it'll pop up as an IM. If they're not, then they can come back and it can get delivered to their inbox. If they have their phone and they have the iPhone app, that can get sent as a push notification. If they don't, it can get sent as an SMS. If they want, it can get sent as an email. Seamless. So that's what we're doing.
Though that people are in your friend graph. And so, of course, one of the advantages of email is this namespace that you can discover and you can communicate with people who you're not connected with. So how do you think about that in the context of...
So one of the things that is very good to solve with the social graph is spam, right? Mm-hmm. It's been a classic email problem. Email filters over the past 10 or 15 years have gotten very good at filtering out the real junk, right? So you don't get a lot of Viagra email anymore. But you do get a lot of random emails from services that you subscribe to, different things that you connect to that you may not be that interested in hearing from. And one thing that email can't do is differentiate between two real people who are both real people sending you legitimate emails, but it can't differentiate between which one you like more, right?
Gmail's starting to do a good job of that with priority inbox.
Yeah, no, and that stuff is pretty cool.
Right?
It does factor in a bit.
Facebook Connect, I think.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I think for a long time people have agreed that the real way to solve spam and filtering is you should have a list of the people that you want to hear from, right? And we could just do that so easily for people because they have their friends list, their friends have their friends list, so we can tell not only who are the people that you communicate with, but who are the people in your network who are likely to be sending you something that's interesting.
There's a fair amount of manual curation there that gets old pretty fast if you're in contact with a lot of people. Do you see automation of that in your future? In the way that Google is, even though they don't always deliver on the promise, they're trying to get algorithmic about figuring out who you really want to communicate with.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the products that we build have the property that you create social dynamics where people explicitly want to share things with other people, and that ends up being a better way to filter things than you can get through an algorithm. Mm-hmm. Right? I think, some of the examples of products that we've launched or worked on recently are good examples of this. So, Photos goes back a while. Groups is pretty recent. But they both have this property, right? If you had asked people, 10 years ago, what would be the best way to take a big set of photos and identify the people in them, most people would have said you should probably have a face recognition algorithm or something like that and kind of crunch all the photos. But it turns out that it's just a lot easier to let people tag their photos of their friends and create a good interface where you have your friends list there and you could do that. It works really well. And the same thing with groups, right? People have come up with interfaces to try to sort people into groups automatically. What we found, groups has been one of our fastest growing products ever. And what we found is that it works really well when you can put your friends into a group, right? One person does manual work and they do the work for the network, right? So, you get 5 or 10% of users putting all their friends into groups, and now everyone can use these products for effective small group communication. It's really cool.
Some people don't like being put into groups.
Well, they can leave those groups.
But they don't like being put in the first place. And then they get a bunch of mail.
It's a kind of spam, different kind of spam.
It's just an interesting... There's a sort of, to pull back a bit, there's something about Facebook which, and I think you'd acknowledge this, which is that it sort of doesn't ask for permission, it asks for forgiveness. That seems to be a Facebook sort of trait, that it's sort of like, well, we'll just keep pushing that envelope until, oops, okay, sorry, we hear you, and then you listen and you pull back. And that happened with the user ID and wrap leaf incident. And it happened with groups too. It's like all of a sudden I was put in all these groups, I started getting all this mail, I'm like, oh, and then I had to go change my permissions and say, no, don't send this stuff, and so on and so forth. Is that an intentional point of view, or is it sort of, and I'm not against that. As a matter of fact, there's many cases when, I've said to boards that I've had to face, sorry, right? Is that the point, I didn't ask for permission, I asked, I'm now asking for forgiveness. So is that does that resonate with you?
Well, our view is that the friend relationship is meaningful, right? And that's the whole point of having a bi-directional relationship instead of a one-way follow model, right? It's a confirmed thing, right? We're friends. In this graph, what that means is that you now have the right to do certain things. You can post on my page.
Right.
You can tag me in photos.
Right.
Now, filtering in my inbox is sorted on that too, because now any of your friends can send a message that goes to my inbox. So that's really how we look at it.
But you don't have a right to export my data.
What's up?
You don't have a right to export my data. You've made that very clear in this with Gmail.
Yeah, the view there is that everyone owns their own information and has the ability to export it, right? So if you upload photos, you can export that and take it anywhere you want through Connect, and we've made that really easy. And if you want, you can just download all that in a zip file. Now, I think email is a little bit different from social networks in this way. And in an email program, if you have an address book, you've put all the addresses in there. So those addresses are very much your information, right? And downloading that, I think, is a no-brainer. In a social network, your friend list, I think, is your information, right? It's like your set of connections. But if you have an email attached to your account, that's yours. Now, I think it's gray, though, right? When we think about this, there's information that's clearly yours, right? Like if you upload a photo album or write a blog post, that's yours, right? There's information that's clearly not yours, right? If it's someone else's photo album.
Right.
And then there's information that maybe is somewhere in the middle. And I think maybe a photo that you took that I'm tagged in maybe is somewhere in the middle. It's like, what is my rights, or what are my rights for what I should be able to do with that? What should I be able to do with your email address if we're friends and I can see your email address? And I think that those are kind of unsolved problems, and I think we need to sort through that. So I'm not sure we're 100% right on this, but I do think it's not quite that simple, and we're trying to think through these things and be respectful of all the forces that are at play. Right? Because one thing that we do here a lot, our value system errs very strongly on the side of openness and portability, and that's what we've built Connect, which as far as I can tell, is the single largest system that allows people to bring their data from one system to another that's ever been created. But what we hear most of the time, there's a community here that I think is very invested in that stuff, and we feel pretty aligned with that because we think that in a lot of ways that's the future. That's what's enabling a lot of the new applications and great stuff to get built. But the feedback that we get on a day-to-day basis from hundreds of millions of people is more along the lines of, we want control of all the information that we put into the site. I want to make sure that if I upload a photo album, that stays with exactly the set of people that I said could see it. And it's just mediating that tension, I think, is a challenging thing.
So why not an option to say, okay, I'm okay with this information to be downloaded? I mean, it seems to me that, however you get an email address, you have the option manually to transfer it from one place to another. If it's visible to you, then effectively you have it. It seems a bit of sophistry to say, oh, well, that's really private information and you can't own it. I mean, and if you can suck it in from Google, it certainly seems that it ought to be symmetrical, that they ought to be able to get it.
No, I mean, I think what you're saying is definitely true. And just as a design principle, what we've said, I mean, take photos for an example. If you set a photo to be visible to friends only, and we're friends and I see that, and I go to share it with someone else who's not my friend, technically, I can download it and send it and email it to my friend, but if you try to send it to them through Facebook, we give you an error message, right? And I mean, that's just, we're trying to give user control. I mean, this is an example where these two things are somewhat at odds and at tension. I just think the correct answer isn't completely obvious. Now, I'm not sure that we're completely right, but it's not, I think, a completely black and white thing.
This is the thing that I find fascinating both about Facebook and where we are as a culture, is that we could talk for 2 hours on this stage about this and probably maybe make a little progress in understanding a conversation that is ongoing in our culture that has not finished, as you point out. On the other hand, we have now, the Congress sort of interested, not just in this question, but very specifically in your company. How do you handle, a headline such as Facebook response prompts strong words from privacy lawmakers? There's a new Congress, and the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Joe Barton, incoming, said, in the next Congress, we and our subcommittees are going to put internet privacy policies in the crosshairs. Can you go to them and say, look, we're figuring it out, leave us alone for now?
No, but this is what I was saying. I think right now, a lot more of the feedback that we get is on the side of users need complete control of making sure that anything that they put on the site will only go to the people who they say it will go to, right? And my guess would be that over the next few years, I don't know how long this will take to play out, the data portability and openness side of this it'll become a lot more obvious why that's valuable and the types of great experiences that can be created through that. But I think right now a lot more people are just on the side of asking for user control. And I don't know, you just said we can be up here for 2 hours and have this discussion. I mean, these are some of the intellectual debates that we have inside the company every day. And I mean, frankly, it's one of the reasons why being at Facebook now is so exciting, right? I mean, I think we are kind of at the forefront of some of these issues, which are really unsolved issues in the industry. And I don't know, trying to come up with solutions and propose them is a really interesting problem and an exciting thing to be doing.
I have to say, I do think, despite the fact that it's a very tough position to be in with, for example, Congress, the approach you're taking is right. We got to go push the boundaries and figure out where they are, because if we set rules too early, we won't figure it out. We just won't. We're going to stay in the past. So.